excited to have you here for this really special conversation that I'm excited to learn from. So thank you for spending the hour with us. So the title, my name is Ashley McClure. I'm one of the co-founders and the ED now of Climate Health Now. And our conversation today would be with three leaders in the community and allies teaching us about the theme around refinery closures and a just transition and how to do both of those things, and sharing specifically about the Contra Costa Refinery Transition Partnership, and so that we can all learn from that and, you know, kind of from there, hopefully help more refineries or any refineries to transition fairly. So it'd be great if you could write your name in the chat and where you're joining from, and I will move it forward. So Lisa, go ahead and take it from here.
Oh, thank you so much, and welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining. I'm Lisa Chang. I'm a member of Climate Health Now's statewide leadership team, and I help coach our amazing advocacy campaign teams who work on statewide climate and health legislation. Well, we certainly did not anticipate that issues around refinery transition would come to dominate the climate conversation in the state legislature. We started the session with high hopes, with a groundswell of grassroots support for the Polluters Pay Climate Superfund bills. But we felt our momentum starting to stall when the Valero refinery announced that it was closing. And then we all saw the resulting pandemonium, the panic about gas prices, the rush to react, leading to some hastily passed bills that may open Kern County up to more drilling and that may weaken some of our cherished health and environmental safeguards. We would like to thank our friends at 350 Contra Costa for getting us in touch with the experts on refinery transition who have so generously agreed to speak with us today, because we are left with a lot of questions. What will the refinery closures really mean for the surrounding communities, for the people who work at the refineries, and for the broader economic and political landscape in California? Who exactly are the trades and the other refinery workers? And is there any chance of us all working together toward common goals of clean air, clean water, improved health for everyone, and economic prosperity that leaves no one behind? And we keep hearing about an elusive vision of a just and well-managed transition. What exactly would that look like? And is it even possible? And I'm so pleased to introduce our panel of experts today. Jessie Hammerling is co-director of the Green Economy Program at the UC Berkeley Labor Center. Emma Ishii is the local policy coordinator for APEN, the Asian Pacific Environmental Network. And Josh Anijar is the executive director of the Contra Costa Labor Council. We want to put a spotlight on their groundbreaking work on refinery transition, and we're eager to learn from them. Thank you so much.
Awesome. So I will think if you want to share, Emma, and thank you, Lisa. Really excited to learn from you all.
Okay, let me just get it into view. Can people see this? Is this full screen?
Not full screen, maybe slideshow it. Is that
Okay.
slide showing it?
Got it. Hold on one second. Thank you for the... Okay.
All
Good
right.
now.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, I'm going to pass it over to Josh to do our intro.
Hey, everybody. So my name is Josh Anijar. I'm with the Contra Costa Labor Council. Really excited to share this all with you. You know, what we're going to be talking about is a series of research and reports that we have done in collaboration with both institutions like UC Berkeley Labor Center, environmental justice organizations like APEN, and key unions that represent the workers in refineries across Contra Costa County. In Contra Costa, there were 4 refineries that were producing oil as of in 2020, and we'll get into why this partnership happened and what we were able to figure out and where it sort of goes from here. So if we want to go on forward here, we'll nerd out with all of you. So like I said, we're going to talk about some of our research, talk about our proposed recommendations, like what is a just transition framework, and like where do we go from here? And I think that's a really good question, as you all sort of started with, there was a new sort of articulation at the state capitol, and I don't think anyone realized how fast things would switch, and so we'll be talking about that too. So really, there has been a long history in Richmond and across Contra Costa of the environmental justice community and labor, sometimes not on the same page, but a lot of times really on the same page, and ensuring that both accidents don't happen and that our communities are held safe. And we're gonna show you more details and go into some stuff here, but sort of the history of this, and I'm really glad that Emma brought this up. In 2012, when there was a fire at Richmond, both the workers and community members stood together to really think about what are new safety regulations that we can have so that people aren't experiencing the burden of environmental pollution in their neighborhoods. And once again, during a labor strike at Chevron, the environmental justice community stood shoulder to shoulder with workers on the picket line, demanding justice and better wages and better working conditions there. So this isn't like a new thing. We all live in the same sandbox, and we all work together to really think about justice and how do we make sure that all workers are protected. But our work really started in 2020. And if you want to switch back to that slide, Emma, when I got a phone call from USW5. They are the steelworker union that represents workers at Chevron, at Marathon, and at what once was Shell is now called PBF, that's based in Martinez. They called me during, we were dealing with crises everywhere. It was COVID. Things were going, as you all remember, you're all health professionals. You were in the front lines, and I want to thank you all for everything that you do during COVID and now to make sure that our communities are kept healthy. But we got a phone call that Marathon was going to permanently idle. And we didn't know what that meant. Like I didn't at that moment know when I got that call what it meant. Basically, what it did mean was that Marathon was going to stop all production at their facility in Martinez, and that over 700 workers were going to be laid off, and including 350 that were with the steel workers. There was no just transition for them. They had no options for new jobs. In fact, Marathon banned them from going to other facilities. And we can get into details of why in a bit, but a lot of it dealt with that these refineries that we have in Contra Costa are the safest and have a worker voice in there, which means that the workers have a collective bargaining agreement, they're unionized. And a lot of other facilities across the country, that's not the case. And they didn't want to spread sort of the unionization into other facilities. But later, of course, it was moved into biodiesel. We'll talk about biodiesel, I'm sure, in a little bit. Oh, gesundheit. But overall, this was a sort of a watershed moment for our labor council dealing with the ramifications of one of our largest economic drivers closing down. And at that moment, I began to make phone calls. We talked to Blue Green Alliance, who helped us get an HRTP so that we can actually study what this means. And we're going to go through a lot of those studies, but this all began because Marathon shut down and workers were left in the cold, and community too. And we'll get into that in a little bit as well about sort of the larger high road training partnership. That's what that is a high road training partnership to think through the refinery transition. So if we want to go on to the next slide here. So I think this is still me, right, Emma? It's still me going through here. Yes.
Yeah. You can add in if you're missing.
So part of this was like, we didn't want to just do this alone as labor, right? I think, especially for the Labor Council, our workers intersect everywhere with refineries. We have the workers inside the refineries. We have workers that live right in fence line communities and low wage workers as well. And also we have we represent like pulmonary nurses and healthcare workers that are also seeing increased asthma, increased cancer in Contra Costa County. So this really does cut through just about every sector of the labor movement. But this was to really think through, how do we build a partnership of workers and community to think through our economic stability in Contra Costa County and what it meant, what did refining mean for this county and for our economic resilience. What I'm really excited about is that we did a lot of studies, one in which we followed the workers at Marathon after their layoff for 2 years, almost like an ethnographic study, where we were able to really show the detriment of not having a transition plan in place so that workers did have some form of economic survival. We also talked about when would this transition happen? How does it look? When are we going to like peak electricity or hydrogen or those sort of things? And then we really wanted to think through, like, how do we do this in a larger scale, and where should we try to implement and get this heard? So that was kind of the goals of what we were doing. This was started in 2020. So it was a 4-year process, basically, of us working together. It was kind of like the best kept secret in Contra Costa County, because this really was, especially for labor, was the third rail. These are good union jobs that provide many people with a high school education, with a pathway to the middle class. And we saw that in the Marathon study, which I think is the next slide here. Nope, it's about what I just said. So this is the partnership that did the HRTP. It was the Blue Green Alliance. It was the steel workers. It was APEN as our environmental justice partner in this. UC Berkeley Labor Center, the United Association of Steam Fitters, Local 342, the Labor Council, and also the California Federation of Labor Unions. We're all a part of this thing. And I think, Jessie, this is you, right?
Yeah, I think I'll take it over from here. Thanks, Josh.
Absolutely.
Great. All right. Yeah, great to be with you all, and thanks for inviting us to do this. It's been really great to have opportunities to share this work with various audiences, and just really appreciate the interest from you all and knowing the really great work that you all are doing on these issues. So very happy to be here to talk about this and be in conversation with you all. So I lead the Green Economy program at the UC Berkeley Labor Center. We're an applied research center based at the university. So we do mostly sort of bridging research and sort of public interest oriented research. So we work with policymakers. We work directly with unions and community-based organizations and others. So most of our work is sort of aimed at informing policymaking and so forth. As Josh described, after the layoff in 2020, this was really like a wake-up call for the union that represents the refinery workers, right? Like, these refineries have been there for, some cases over 100 years. Like, these refineries have been there for a really long time. It's people who, many cases, multi-generational families who work at the refineries, and they basically didn't have any sort of reason to believe that, like, their jobs were going away and or that their jobs were in jeopardy. They sort of, have been believing what they've been told from industry, which is like, it's fine, yeah, we know California has like climate goals or whatever, but people still drive cars, so your jobs aren't going anywhere. We'll be able to adjust and pivot. You're not going to lose your jobs. I'll just say, I have yet to meet anybody who's a climate change denier who works at a refinery. This is all about like the expectations of like, well, if the refineries have to keep operating, we're going to keep working because these are good jobs and this is sort of a necessary part of what fuels the economy and so forth. And then when Marathon idled, they laid off all those people, over 700 people with minimal notice. It was really a wake-up call to say, oh, this transition seems to be starting and we're not prepared for it, and they're not going to give us a heads up, and we need some more information about what this is going to look like. And we know that, they knew that they weren't the only ones affected by this, right? And that's part of the reason for doing this in a partnership format, where it wasn't just the steel workers who represent the refinery workers trying to ask some questions. They're asking these questions with APEN, with other labor unions, with other folks in the community who are going to be directly affected by the transition, because there's a shared interest in understanding what's going to happen, how this is going to play out, to develop, what's going to be needed to actually plan ahead for the transition and not to have the consequences just sort of be thrust upon them. So, so our role as the UC Berkeley Labor Center was to lead the research elements of this partnership. And so there was 5 studies. I'm going to run through each of these. I won't go through it. Represents a lot of work, like for 4 years of research, like 5 different research projects, multiple researchers and studies, and you can look up the white papers, the ones that are underlined. There's links to on our website. So I will not be going into a ton of detail here. This is going to be very, very high level. But just to say, these were some of the key questions, right? And Josh mentioned the fossil fuel layoff study. So understanding what are the impacts of refinery closures on workers? We have this layoff here. What happened to folks a year after they were laid off? The second study was the refinery transition analysis. We will drop a link to the website. Second was looking at anticipating future changes at Bay Area refineries. So like what's likely to change in the market. The third study was looking at the how this would affect the local economy and also public health. What happens when a refinery closes? What are the impacts? A study about decommissioning and cleanup, which we'll talk more about. And then finally, sort of an economic development analysis, like what strategies could work for economic development, given the kind of challenges and opportunities here. So let's jump in. So first, it's always really important, and as part of the research that we did and just diving into these questions, to establish an understanding of like the baseline conditions in Contra Costa County. And in particular, what's really critical here is the twin problems of environmental and economic inequality. So this slide shows the census tract rankings for CalEnviroscreen, which I'm assuming most of you may be familiar with, but it measures exposure to multiple forms of pollutants. And so areas near the refineries, those red zones, are really among the most polluted zones in the whole state. Sorry if you can hear a dog barking in the background. I don't know if that's coming through. It's lunchtime, time for walks. And so, so the pollution is from, not only the refineries, but all the activity associated with the refineries and other industrial activity that happens in the same area. And so people who live in these zones have long experienced serious health consequences, higher rates of asthma, cardiovascular and pulmonary disease, among other things. And, as you can see on the map, at the same time, Contra Costa County has these deep blue areas, right, where there's very low levels of pollution. So let's go to the next slide. So the next slide, I'm going to keep going and not do questions live because I think I don't want to slow us down too much. There's going to be, I don't want to cut into the Q&A at the end. So I'm sorry, I'm gonna ignore the chat, but I promise we'll come back to it in the Q&A. So income, sorry. Okay, good. So this slide may look sort of similar. This shows median income in Contra Costa County. So you can see a really similar pattern here. So the areas near the refineries are very low income, right? Like, it's under 75K for household income here, right? In those sort of red and lighter red zones. And a similar distribution, very high incomes in some parts of the county, which also happen to be the areas where pollution tends to be lower. And this pattern of spatialized inequality is not unique to Contra Costa County. This is part of a many decades trend of growing inequality across the US, rich getting richer, stagnant wages for the working class, and like just a disappearing middle income earners in general. And at the same time, people being increasingly segregated by where they live based on their income, which often correlates with race, ethnicity as well. And that contributes to concentrating the environmental burdens on folks that are the most vulnerable. Great. So just a few points on the research process. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but we did this process in conversation with the partnership. So it wasn't like, they gave us these research questions. We went away for a few years and then came back at the end with a bunch of studies to share. It was really, we were sharing findings as we went. The partners, Josh, Emma, the other folks who were involved in the partnership were giving us input on the kinds of questions we were asking, how we were framing them, how we were approaching answering them. We were sharing preliminary findings every step of the way. And that was really a critical part of not just doing the research, but also having the research inform the the relationship building and the understanding of common ground and common challenges among the partnership. So it really sort of worked in a lot of different ways, but it was a core part of how we approach this work. Go to the next slide. So yeah, I'm going to breeze through the findings of these really quick. So the fossil fuel layoff study that we've talked about a little bit, and this was interviews with the folks who were laid off from Marathon after it idled in 2020. So 1 year after the layoff, 26% of workers were still unemployed. 24%, for those who did find work, their wages were 24% lower in general. People reported really serious financial challenges post-layoff. The bottom line here is it was really hard for people to find jobs within a year after the layoff. And especially, it was really hard for them to find jobs that paid anywhere near what they'd been making at the refinery, or that had comparable job quality. Another thing that people reported is that the health and safety standards in other types of industrial jobs where they weren't necessarily represented by a union anymore were much, much lower. And that made people really uncomfortable, right? They'd fought really hard for health and safety standards at the refineries. Let's go to the next one. So for the refinery transition analysis, so here again, the goal was to understand how is transition likely to unfold in the region? There's obviously a lot of variables there, and I'm not going to get into the details of this one. But the bottom line here is that the demand for core refinery products, gasoline and diesel fuel, is on a planned decline in California at a rate that is unlikely to support continuing operations at all of the Bay Area's existing refineries in the coming decades. And we expect additional shutdowns, and we have been seeing those announcements already, right? I mean, we did this research before the Valero announcement, before the Phillips 66 announcement in Southern California. So, we expect there to be additional shutdowns in the coming decades, and that, by 2045, we may have one, maybe two small refineries in the region, and potentially none at all. And so there's, again, a lot of variables. We don't have a crystal ball. But the bottom line here is that additional shutdowns of refineries in Contra Costa and Solano County are likely, and we see that bearing out as time goes on. Okay, third. So the third study was an economic impact assessment of the shutdowns. So considering the current role of the refineries in the region, including their supply chains locally. And here we looked at a number of different dimensions. So first on health. So clearly the refinery industry contributes to air pollution, right? It's one of the big contributors to the air pollution in the region and other types of pollution. And that has very significant, costly, and unequal public health impacts. In addition to, eliminating the refinery's emissions obviously is a potential benefit here, but there's also new risks related to cleanup, and we'll talk more about that. The second category here is jobs. So as we've just been talking about, and when we did a broader economic analysis, not just looking at the laid off workers, the industry is an important source of well-paying jobs for workers who don't have a college degree in Contra Costa. So like blue collar workers in Contra Costa, these refinery jobs are among a very limited share of like really good quality jobs that pay enough where you can support a family. There's just not a lot of other good options for people to have decent wages and job quality. So it's important to recognize that. And that includes folks directly at the facilities and a lot of the like construction and maintenance workers that maybe aren't employed by the facilities, but their jobs are dependent on the refineries being there. And the third is tax revenue. And so this is, there's always a lot of conversation about this. But I think it's valuable to acknowledge and to really understand how revenue from the industry and from, again, all the economic activity that's only there because of the industry, it's a substantial share of funding for local governments that funds essential government services in addition to supporting a lot of public sector jobs. And so, there's a lot more we could go into about that. But yeah, I mean, the loss of one of these facilities potentially has really serious ramifications for fiscal health in any of the given local jurisdictions. And it's really important that we're planning for that. So this isn't all sort of an argument for prolonging the refineries, right? This is about understanding what the impact will be when they go so that we can prepare for it. Okay, fourth, decommissioning and cleanup. So I'm going to not talk too much about this because I think Emma's going to talk about it more, but the process for what it will look like as refineries shut down and what are some of the challenges related to cleanup and remediation. So I'm going to leave this one for Emma, and we'll go to the next slide. And this is, I think, my last one. So in the end, we sort of integrated learnings from all of these studies and did an additional economic development analysis here, where we were looking at like challenges and opportunities for the region as it faces refinery transition. So this is kind of bringing it all together and thinking about what do we need to be doing here to be planning for a future economy and a just transition. So on the one hand, the challenge is, refinery transition is going to be really tough, right? We have these underlying conditions of economic and environmental inequality, and then changing demand for the refinery products is potentially going to have some really serious negative consequences for the region. At the same time, it also presents opportunities, right? Sort of loss of the direct source pollution from the facilities themselves, but also the need to address these really serious challenges related to local economy, related to cleanup. All that gives us a chance to build a more resilient, equitable, sustainable economy in Contra Costa, really address some of those underlying challenges that we started with as we think about what we want Contra Costa's economy to look like moving forward. So I'll leave it there and hand it to Emma.
Thank you. Hold on. I'm just gonna just stop sharing and then reshare. I just can't see your faces. I just want to be able to see you all. Okay. Wait a minute. Okay, sorry about that. Just give me a moment. Okay. Can you all see the screen? Okay. Hold on one
It says
second.
it's coming up still.
Oh, okay, okay. Thank you. Okay. Sorry. What about now?
It still says
Seeing it.
it's started screen sharing. Oh, double click to enter full screen mode, maybe? If you
Okay.
do.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Okay.
The
Okay.
suspense is building.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, people. Okay. Thank you, Jessie, for turning it over to me. All right. Okay, here we go.
Yep.
Okay. So, something that we heard from our conversations with Ashley and Lisa were that, you all wanted to hear about what the health impacts are both on community right now, and then also what are the important things we need to be planning for and thinking through once, refinery transition does start happening. And as we can see, and as Jessie was really sharing, is that like we are seeing this happen now. So it's really important for us to start planning and thinking through. And just for context for folks who aren't familiar with APEN's work, just wanted to share a little bit, but our members are mostly Richmond residents, but some of them live in other parts of Contra Costa, but majority of them are refugee and immigrant communities who came to Richmond and to the Contra Costa, not really knowing that they were moving in this refinery corridor that we were seeing on the maps. And so what it's really resulted in for people, not only like the asthma, that asthma rates that Jessie was referring to, but also just generally other health impacts that people were talking about before. And also like let's just say in 2012, the Chevron explosion, it sent 15,000 people to the hospital. So it really has a, either like ongoing impacts, but also impacts related to, emergencies that come up during refineries operation. But yeah, I mean, I think I would just say too that that's really why APEN members, fight for these kind of discussions and like actually getting these recommendations implemented so that we can actually see, our communities in like with healthy air and clean water and all of those benefits that we really want to see. So there's no really way to um, measure, some of the impacts that I was talking about, like, missed school days due to asthma attacks or, people having to work more to pay for medical bills, but the EPA actually had this really interesting calculator that we used that showed that it could be an estimate between 290 to $560 million annually, if let's just say all the refineries shut down, and there weren't any of the criteria pollutants emitting from refineries, and so I just with a grain of salt, like this is just an estimate, but um, we thought it was really helpful because I think that this is a research gap really that exists on like how to capture what the impacts have been for people. And this is just the map that we sh showed earlier too. Um, and just to give an idea on the types of pollutants that are emitted from refineries and that we see um, are connected to those health impacts. We have all of these listed on here. PM 2.5, I feel like is the one that people are really familiar with, but the NOx and SOx. And this just shows, I think, the magnitude of like the pollutants that are being emitted and that our communities are exposed to. And I think it's hard sometimes to really understand that because it's like it's in some ways it is hidden, right? Like in our air, like what is actually in our air. But we thought this was helpful to share. Um, and so yeah, so that is just the like a really brief snapshot of like what people are experiencing. And maybe some of you all work with patients or you're pediatricians and you work with families, but I think that you all have maybe some sense of what how serious like some of these respiratory and like heart impacts are. And so that's why it's really important.
I think we lost Emma for a second.
Yeah, I thought it was me.
So that's why it's really important to do this work. I'll just keep going here, and maybe we'll stop sharing screen. If you could, someone that's a host can stop sharing screen. We're going to do this live. We're going to do this. Another part of the health problem is too with these workers. Because we don't have a single payer system, which the labor movement is definitely in favor of. Also the detriment of workers losing their health care, losing their economic survival is another part of this that also should be acknowledged and so forth. But I think we were going to go talk about decommissioning and really like who pays for this. So let's say if a refinery shuts down, who is left paying for the cleanup? Most of these refineries, very recently in Pittsburgh, California, which was named Pittsburgh, random fact, because the steel mill came in there in 1900. Oh, is Emma back?
Yeah, I'm
Oh,
sorry,
there you are.
everyone.
Okay, I was just going
Thank
like
you.
this with it. No problem. But
Thank you
on
so
that,
much.
like in 1900 is when they built that steel mill, and who knows what's buried under there. And even to this day, we don't know who is going to pay to clean that up. I think they're waiting for the developers. When we think about refineries, the same exact thing can hold true. So many things are probably underneath, so many spills and so forth that are in the land there that should it be taxpayers or the county or any of us paying for that? Take it away. I just want to at least finish that sentence.
Okay,
Hey,
thank you.
Josh,
I
why did they name it Pittsburgh?
Because the steel mill came in. It was named like Blue Diamond or Black Diamond before that, and then in 1900 they put a steel mill in Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania's got a lot of steel workers, so they named the city Pittsburgh because of that, and that steel mill closed down about a year and a half ago. Totally random little fact that I learned in this work here.
Thank you, Josh, for filling in for me here. Our office sometimes has some internet problems. But okay, so I was just explaining to you, and thank you, Josh, for just elucidating like the importance of the decommissioning piece. And so actually in our research, and particularly we worked with CBE and also Connie Cho on our staff helped to conduct this research. And it was actually a lot of conversations with, different agencies at the state level and the local level. And here are some of our main takeaways. So, as Josh was saying, refinery lands all have significant contamination. I've been talking a lot about air pollution, but if you actually think about the soil and the surface water and the groundwater, all of these things, even though they're, let's just say they're sitting in like a container, they're still like seepage that can happen and that does happen. And so, yeah, and there's a really serious health risks that come along with those unabated contaminations, as we were saying. And so then what does that look like to actually enforce this cleanup process? So they're actually pretty confusing, laws and different overlapping jurisdictions when it comes to refineries. And we just cited a few here, like the RCRA, or the Resources Conservation and Recovery Act, California Hazardous Waste Control Act, so some other higher standards at the state level. And I think that I just said it a little bit here, but different overlapping jurisdictions that are responsible for this, that it'll be really important for them to all be working together. So yeah, and then when it comes to us knowing that there are contaminated lands, the problem is that that really I think we need to address before we can even start planning for what comes next is, we actually don't know the details. Like these companies actually haven't let people or the actual agencies know really what's on their land or what the extent of the contamination is. So that'll be a really important piece for us to try to actually get that information and really so we can start doing that planning process and also so we can hold them financially accountable for some of this or as much as possible this contamination. And related to the other research that Jessie was speaking about, you know, um, we have seen in other communities that refinery owners know that there is such an extensive amount of contamination, and they usually use like delaying tactics to postpone like full closures, or maybe they'll just idle their facility so they actually it doesn't trigger the accountability and them having to actually um, give the financial assurances to do the cleanup. So that is a risk too that companies could file bankruptcy or try to, like wipe their hands clean of some of this really important contamination remediation that needs to happen. So that's why it's so important that we prepare ahead for this and start having these conversations, like both with community and labor, but also at the local levels. Um, okay, so now we're going to talk through our actual recommendations. And Jesse and Josh, I figure that you can just like jump in these sections. But so we talked about all of those different aspects of our research, and these are our recommendations that we came up with. And I just wanted to say too that we consider ourselves as like not experts necessarily, but like, people who will try to start this conversation and for the rest of people to have. So
Yeah, and I also want to also lift up that there's nothing like this, I don't think, anywhere in the country where workers and academics and environmental justice organizations have joined together to really look at and tackle this existential problem and existential threat for Contra Costa County. So really, we like to center this. I love Venn diagrams. I do, and it's really about how do we create, if we are going to transition away, how do we create meaningful, good high road jobs that people with a high school diploma can afford to buy a house, groceries, the stuff in the labor movement that we know, bread and roses. On top of that, how do we make sure that our county that Jessie was talking about, to make sure that it can provide the services from fire protection to having social workers, you name it, that those services aren't cut and we move into an austerity like environment in the Bay Area. And on top of that, we want communities to thrive. We want to make sure people are healthy, that they can go outside, that like in Martinez, that they aren't being chemically dusted every 2 weeks, right? And so all of this should not be in silos by themselves. And for us, it really is about how do we find a path forward that addresses all three of these large issues to really find some common sense solutions. If you want to go to the next slide. So, okay, here are some of our policy recommendations. And Jessie, do you want to take some of this? Or you want me to do it? I can keep going, but I didn't want
to. You're doing great.
Okay, great.
I'll jump in if you want, but
no. Okay, jump in whenever I mess up. How about that? So part of this is we wanted to think through what does a refinery transition plan look like, and having we have 31 policy recommendations for both a county and a state level, making sure that there is some sort of worker safety net, that workers are kept whole through this transition, which we didn't see at Marathon, that if there was another refinery closure like we're seeing in Benicia right now, that there are ways that we make sure that people are kept whole. The parts that Emma was talking about land use and decommissioning and cleanup, to refinery community support, like how do we support frontline communities so that they too can maybe prosper in these goods. That's another part of all of this too, that so many of the workers that are on the fence line communities did not get to enjoy the prosperity, economic prosperity of having these good union jobs, right? They were sort of left in the shadows of the refineries without having access to those jobs. And how do we switch that? So if we do build new economies, if we do build a new high road around green economy, that it isn't a race to the bottom, but yet everyone together can prosper. And then a larger sort of just transition economic development framework that the county could take to think about how do we, if there is an energy transition in California, which we all agree is occurring, how do we make sure that the new jobs that are created in the green economy are centered here so that there is a chance for everyone to stay currently where they live in the communities that they love to be in, and that they have a chance to prosper.
And I just wanted,
please.
Oh, sorry, I just wanted to add too that when we're talking about what the future of the economy in Contra Costa is, labor and community really need to be part of that process, and to actually start to think through yes, what do we want to say yes to? What is the criteria for these potential industries coming in? So.
Yes. And then if you want to go to the next slide. Oh, here we are. That's sort of a quick synopsis. Obviously, there's so much more we could talk about and nerd out with you all on this, and we probably will through the Q&A. And so happy, I think we're all happy to take questions about what we just ran through, and then love to hear some thoughts.
Woohoo! So a big round of applause. You can do your emoji round of applause, or you want to come off mute. But thank you all for walking us through this, because it's super enlightening and so much work went into it. So I get to start us off. So we would love everybody to put your questions in the chat. We have some that we thought about beforehand, so we'll start with those, and then please do put yours in the chat also. So I will kick us off with a question, and if all three of you want to answer, or whoever it feels right to answer, that would be great. So the first one is, this kind of coalition building in the county. What are the ways, how how, if you were to tell Governor Newsom, this is the plan, this is how to bring this to the state level, what are like the stepping stones for that?
So I think like if you're looking at how to build coalitions or how to build, like I will say like having the steel workers and the building trades together alone was kind of a monumental thing. They always don't see eye to eye. And so having that alone, I think it's really about being radically honest with people, right? We know that not everyone's going to agree on everything, that there are certain things that either some unions might take that other unions might not agree with, or that unions might do that environmental justice doesn't agree with, right? That's okay. It's about where we can actually work together on issues that we all have like consensus on. And we've really focused on those things instead of going back to debates that could last us forever, where we're not going to see eye to eye. We decided to really focus on where do we agree. And then I think a lot of this too was because there was a crisis. There's the old saying that, in Japanese, like a crisis is also opportunity, right? So there was a crisis here that we could take to have an opportunity to have these discussions where if Marathon didn't permanently idle, we would not have had this chance to really sit down and think through what is the overall landscape of Contra Costa look like and how can we work together to make sure that all workers have a voice in the future of their communities. I don't know if Emma, if you want to.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think that we're really we are talking to other organizations and groups across the different areas in California. So we're really hoping that, people can be inspired by this and maybe take some of our lessons and run with it. Because I do think that the local level like is what we really have control over, and it's like we could just show like our successes, and hopefully that the state will take our lead. So.
And I'll just add that, the recommendations that Josh and Emma gave a summary of, like, they're pretty detailed, and like while they are sort of tailored to the specific affected groups in Contra Costa and the conditions in Contra Costa, many of them would be applicable to other similar types of refinery communities across the state. And so, we know we don't have the just transition plan in place at the state level that we need, which is, at the crux of a lot of the conversations around the Valero shutdown, like, we're not ready. We're not ready. We're like, hey, we could be ready. We have a foundation for figuring out what that plan and strategy could look like at the state level. And so let's build off of that work. I think that it's both a lesson for other places and also a foundation on which to build to chart what that just transition plan at the state level that's missing really should be.
So I think the Bill's question in the chat was, how does one practically transition a refinery worker into a clean energy job? Noted, we do not have a centrally managed economy. And I think if you could take that question and then add to it, like, is there, so I know none of us, I don't think, are engineers, but how can you repurpose a refinery? I know, very little except for the name about biofuels. Like that is something that I've heard is like a repurposing, but is there an actual, no pollution way to repurpose a refinery that's on the table?
I mean, no pollution is pretty hard. I will say that the industry is still industry, right? And even like within the political economy of say solar, you're still, doing stuff that isn't that great for the environment and also for the working conditions there, right? But what I think is important is like these are highly trained and skilled workers that have devoted their lives and their profession to doing stuff that like I would have no idea what to do doing that, right? And so yes, there is a way, and there is a like either through water treatment plants or battery manufacturing or working at PG&E and other things like that, that a refinery worker could transition to these jobs. What it takes is workforce development to help do that. And also something that we saw, going on a little side quest for 2 seconds, what we saw with Marathon is that the company owned their certifications and not the workers themselves. That was not true for the building trades, but for the steel workers. So if you take an electrician that works at a refinery, that electrician can get a job as an electrician somewhere else. They have a certificate that I am a journey person electrician, right? And it's accredited and everything, so they can transition pretty easily. For the other workers, we part of the something that we exposed in this was that the companies themselves own their certifications, not the workers themselves. And so it's a lot of work that we're doing now with workforce boards, et cetera, to find ways to certify them so they can't get jobs. There's one story where a worker wanted to go work at a brewery after losing Marathon. He loved beer. I understand I'm talking to healthcare professionals, and like I just went to the doctor today and they asked how many drinks, right? I know it's not good. But anyway, he wanted to go work at a beer place, and they didn't believe that he knew pressure and pipes the way that he was saying he did. But because he didn't have a certification, he couldn't prove it. So I think part of it is, how do we use like certification processes so they can't get those jobs? Another part is, like, how do we make sure that these new green jobs are good jobs, and that the workers there, it isn't a race to the bottom, and that they're on the high road, I think is another really important part of this.
Yeah, so we're not trying to like micro engineer like exactly what job these workers could go into. And what we found in the research is that, yeah, like Josh said, their skills are widely applicable to a number of like public and private sector types of activities that might be useful, which aren't exclusive to clean energy at all. And also there was a lot more opportunity around growing jobs in clean energy manufacturing, in particular when we still had Inflation Reduction Act funds coming out. So the landscape around this has changed, but there's still a lot that California could do. I see somebody referenced SB 787 in the chat, and like, that's a bill that's about sort of California having its own version of industrial policy. And this isn't about like a centrally planned economy, but it is about understanding that these are activities and industries that we sort of know are a critical part of, decarbonization and accelerating the energy transition and security of supply chains and all of this good stuff. And so there's a lot of reason why their government has an interest in growing these kinds of industries. And so as the public sector sort of tries intentionally to grow certain types of activities and industries, that gives you an opportunity to say, well, where should this happen? And what should the jobs look like? And by the way, maybe if we should be like prioritizing regions that are losing jobs in the fossil fuel transition, especially for jobs that will be growing in the greener, cleaner sections. And that there's also ways you can prioritize workers coming out of industries where they may be losing jobs in fossil fuel production, and helping address some of those challenges related to certification that Josh flagged. And so all of this is sort of potential, right? It's not prescriptive, as Emma notes. We weren't prescribing specific industries of investment in this report. It's really that sort of threefold criteria, that Venn diagram that we looked at, of healthy communities, good quality jobs, and economic resilience, and trying to figure out what kind of public and private sector investments and economic development activities could help meet all three of those objectives at the same time.
Do you all know much about geothermal and how likely it is to provide comparable kinds of jobs? And can we just magic it into fixing all the problems?
I don't know, Jessie, if you know more about this, but we haven't, like, at least as our partnership, we have not like looked into that as an industry. But I'll look at the stuff that you guys have sent me.
Yeah, I mean, short answer is no. Like, there's no magic solution. But I do think geothermal has a lot of potential. And it also is a good match for the skill set and training of folks coming out of the fossil fuel industry. The likelihood of that happening here, I think, is a ways off, but not impossible. But there's no silver bullet here. It's about a whole economic development strategy. It's not about finding one technology that's going to solve all your problems.
Another question that we had was that the Polluters Pay Climate Superfund bill does have language about just transition, including support for impacted workers, um, prioritizing labor and job standards, et cetera. And I was wondering if you all had heard much about that particular component of that bill. Is it something that people are talking about and supportive of?
So, I mean, look, I'll say this, right? When we get to state, part of the joy of this collaboration was really about Contra Costa. At the state level, there's, as you probably all know, there's a lot more uh, organizations and lobbyists and so forth. And so, like, we normally don't play into the state that often on this. And really, for us, as I can speak for us, and then others can talk. Uh, like, we have a state organization that deals with state policies. And I know that they looked at it. I'm not sure where they ended up fully on it. I know unions were on both sides of this thing. And usually, when unions are on two opposite sides, it's hard to get consensus of agreeing to do this. I'm not giving you the best answers. I'm sorry, but that's a reality. Um,
Yeah. Um, I mean, I guess I would just say that like speaking as APEN and like not as a member, like the partnership, because we have different streams of work, but we are really active on the local polluter pays campaign in Richmond, obviously, and right now we're in the process of like working on that implementation, making sure that that those funds actually are seen by the community and like that the city actually uses that money to like be thinking through some of these questions, right? So that's what I would say.
Yeah, which is awesome. Emma, we would love to talk about how to support those efforts. So we have a lot more questions and not much more time, but I really, big bow of gratitude for the work that you've done and kind of the path that you've forged and joining us. And we hope to keep learning with you and, to actually see this come to change the world for the next refinery. So thank you. We're going to close down now, looking to the upcoming opportunities to get involved for CHN members. So let's see. I'm going to pull this up.
Do you mind if I just say too, just like,
Yeah.
I just really wanted to say that, healthcare providers and, you all are really key to this process. And I hope that you see that, I'm sure you see how this connects to the people you serve. So, just thank you for your interest. So.
For sure. Yep. Appreciate that. So we'll stay in touch. So just wrapping up quickly. So we have Climate Health Now has a year-long supported healthcare sustainability fellowship for teams of people who want to make change in your workplace. And we have Pam Lee and Bill Pevick are the coaches for that. And we are looking for people who want to make a change in your workplace. So the applications are open for the next about 4 weeks or so. So we would love you to think about that if there's something driving you nuts in your workplace that you want external support to change. Next Tuesday, we have our community meeting, which will be about strategic planning. So CHN is working on for the next 3 years, if you know what I mean, plan to survive and what we want to do in these very unique and challenging times. So we would love you to join to share kind of your vision and what you'd like to see the work include for this term, you could say. And then we have a clinician-led, oh, right. So this is with Kimball Sustainable Healthcare, and I saw Erica was here earlier. So we're going to, on October 2nd, have a meeting where we talk about clinician-led resource conservation and specifically how to reduce waste and, reduce emissions and save money in the hospital. So we would love for you to join that for a really specific example of how, the workers have made a change that saved money. And that will be, I think, an easy pitch to the to the bosses of any hospital. So that will be fun and hopefully inspiring. And then October 9th, this administration has asked 2 of the Bureau of Land Management offices to look into the environmental impact of opening up our public lands to oil and gas drilling. Super surprising. And we're working together to stop that. And we need everybody coming together to help. So October 9th, we're going to be talking about that, how to engage with the BLM, how to give comment, how to stand up together and get a lot of people involved in saying not on our lands. And then lastly, there's a documentary called The Week, which is meant to be watched in over the course of a week, but the closest we're doing is every Thursday for 3 weeks. And each episode is a little bit different and is followed by a conversation with like a group that's watching it together. So it's about the situation we're in with climate change and what to do about it together. And we would love for you to join. It's really like a community building experience. And it is a commitment of time, but a lot of people find it to be really meaningful. So we would love you to join. So that's what's coming up. And that was a lot. And again, thank you so much to Emma and Jessie and Josh. We appreciate your work and solidarity. And thank you, Lisa, for having this, vision for bringing this conversation together. And I hope you all have a great afternoon. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.